Incredibly, there's even a small swimming pool. To keep the Fairfax from drifting while holding position near port requires an anchor of monumental proportions. The Fairfax carries 2 such anchors, each one weighing 22 tons, and the chain on which it hangs weighing an additional 150 tons. The colors on the chain tell the crew how many fathoms have been let out. With that much iron over the side, the ship isn't going anywhere. Stopping the Fairfax at sea is a different matter. That 9-cylinder engine will get the Hellespont Fairfax moving at a top speed of 20 knots, or 36 kilometers an hour. If the engine suddenly fails, it will take more than half an hour for the ship to gradually glide to a halt.
If the ship is running and suddenly you have no power, then by its own inertia will keep going and the speed will go down. But in a calm condition, we estimate that this would be over 2.5 miles.
Unless it hits something big, like Barbados, Aruba, or Cuba. In the Daewoo shipyards of South Korea, where 20,000 workers complete an average of 1 big ship every week, the launch of the largest double-hulled tanker in the world is getting very close. The Hellespont Fairfax, a ship that demonstrates the advantages and the possibly disastrous dangers of supersizing. Supertankers as a class of ships seldom come this close to land. They prefer to offload at pipelines attached to mooring stations several kilometers offshore.
I'm going to take a line from you through a center lead as an escort aircraft.
Yep, very good. Then you just stand by on the stern here and take it.
This giant single-hulled tanker, also owned by the Hellespont Group, illustrates what happens when a supertanker does venture into a harbor. As it slows down, it loses its ability to steer. A tugboat off the stern is there to act as a rudder. If something went wrong and the tanker's single hull ruptured, the massive amount of oil it carries would end the ecological life of the bay for years to come. The double hulls of the Hellespont Fairfax should help to prevent spills. But it's still carrying millions of tons of flammable petroleum across some of the stormiest seas in the world. The list of things that could go wrong is almost as long as the tanker itself. At the top of the list, a possible explosion. If any of the volatile fumes and residues of millions of liters of crude oil linger in the 21 giant tanks, a network of 240 electronic gas detectors, called sniffers, will be on continual alert.
The last thing you want is a spark in that mixture, but you're going to probably get something potentially is there.
That potential is a spark of static electricity produced whenever a liquid flows through a narrow tube at ultra-high pressure. But nothing can burn without oxygen, and Mike Kennedy has designed a unique system that fills the empty tanks and crawl spaces with non-explosive inert gases. Gases that are a byproduct of the ship's own engine. Cooled by sprays of seawater, the exhaust is reduced to harmless nitrogen and transferred to the tanks.
We've tested it in real conditions, and it works well. We can fill a tank safely with inert gas very fast, very efficiently, very thoroughly, and then when we need to inspect that tank or go in that tank, we can, what they call gas free it, put fresh air back in the tank so people can go inside, and we can do it fast, thoroughly, efficiently, and I think it is a real addition, a new addition to safety at sea.
Another likely hazard is metal stress. This super tanker is a prisoner of its own enormous size. It will strain, flex, and twist in the ocean swells. Metal decks and hull will expand and contract as the ship travels from the desert heat of Arabia to the frigid waters of the South Atlantic. Because double hulls have only been around for the past 5 years, little is known about their long-term reaction to stress. The hulls and the narrow chamber of inert gas that divides them are constantly bending. There is always the danger that something will snap and cause a catastrophe. Along the deck, a series of stress sensors detect movement in the hull, which will alert Captain Seraphiminus to slow the ship down or change direction to reduce the strain.
Here is a stress monitor. Can show us where the ship hurts. There are 4 sensors around the deck. We have 3 from starboard side and 1 from port side, the left side of the ship. We can see the stresses at any moment.
It seems like a very simple idea, but what you have is you have a very heavy cargo pressing down on the double hull space. Then you have this gap of roughly 3 meters, and then on the other side you're 20 to 25 meters deep in the sea, and it's pushing up from the bottom. And during the course of a voyage, the ship will naturally flex a bit.
Miles of pipelines on the main deck also are designed to cope with stress without bursting. Non-rigid couplings will bend and flex with the movement of the ship. Below decks, there are more hazards. On every voyage, crew members will have to squeeze themselves between the cargo tanks and the inner hull to check visually for cracks, rust, and corrosion. The job will take 4 men 3 whole days as they wander for miles, caught between millions of barrels of oil, tons of flexing steel, and the infinite ocean. Even the ship's outer surfaces are cause for concern and potential danger. Acres of blinding white epoxy paint on the upper deck are intended to reflect the Arabian sun, while coat after coat of rust-proofing on the hull will fight corrosion and repel the barnacles and other marine hitchhikers that could slow the ship down and cost its owners time and money. Imagine having to spray paint a surface of 50,000 square meters. That's enough paint to cover more than 100 two-story houses. And then when it dries, spraying it again and again and again. 3 coats of anti-corrosive, followed by a bonding coat, followed by 3 more coats. These final 3 coats are anti-fouling paint, which will very slowly wear off, micron by micron, taking with it any marine growth like barnacles and seaweed, which are hitching a ride. Inside the tanks, another monumental paint job. Anti-abrasive coating is applied to resist the corrosive cocktail of seawater and sulfur. Ultimately, even this supertanker will rust. The crews can only battle to keep the Fairfax rust-free for its projected lifespan of 40 years. The rest of the ship is painted white to reflect back some of the desert heat and reduce evaporation of the precious cargo, and white so that any leaks or drips will be easily seen.
And we hope to reduce cargo loss through vapor emission by having a cooler cargo. The differences between white and red are as much as 20 degrees Celsius, so it makes a big difference.
For the crew members who find the acres of glaring white decks hard to take, there will be a special issue of ultra-dark sunglasses. But there's a problem. As workers prepare to apply the final coats of paint, the weather turns damp and foggy. Under these conditions, the paint won't cure properly. Both the builder and the buyer are anxious. The Hellespont team has to get their ship to the oil fields because the price of oil is $30 US a barrel, or $96 million a trip. And the Korean shipyard, well, they'd like to get to final delivery and an $80 million payday. The shipyard suggests wrapping the ship in plastic and using giant heaters to keep it warm. Mike Kennedy insists that the paint must cure naturally in the 4 days allotted. This decision backs up more than the completion of the Fairfax. In a shipyard that must complete an average of 1 ship a week, valuable dry dock space won't be available. Mike won't compromise this time. The launch date is set back 3 whole days. With launch day finally in sight, the biggest of the new breed of tankers will begin its working life firmly at the center of world attention. Mike Kennedy recalls that at the keel laying ceremony 18 months ago, a cake was presented to the officials, and in accordance with Korean tradition, pieces of cake were also offered to the gods of the sea. Whether the gods had their cake, and ate it too, will soon become clear. Will it live up to all of the expectations, or will it be a massive miscalculation? Launch day in South Korea for one of the largest ships in the history of ships, the Hellespont Fairfax.
The world's largest double hull at this very moment is a huge ship. It has an overall length of 380 meters. The breadth of the ship, how wide it is 68 meters. And the deck to the bottom, the depth of the ship as we call it, is 34.5 meters.
For 4 hours, water is let into the construction dock until the Hellespont Fairfax slowly rises from its berth. Without ballast, the mighty propeller remains well clear of the water. Launching a ship that weighs 67,000 tons is a slow and careful process, not a sudden splash. There will be no champagne and no sliding down a slipway into the harbor. Since the Fairfax shares its berth with other big ships under construction, they will also have to be rearranged. In some cases, huge bits of ships find themselves prematurely launched. paramount of all. Of ship's horns, the Fairfax floats free. A man-made sea monster finally taking to the sea. It has taken 18 months to assemble the double hull. The 21 tanks for heavy crude oil. The mammoth engine. Propeller, anchor, and rudder. Now, every system needs to be checked out before the maiden voyage to the oil wells of Arabia. The engine will be checked for vibrations at full speed ahead. Pressure and lubricating oils are watched intently. The mighty engine needs a complete oil change every 2 hours. Smoke detectors, bridge alarms, steam turbine pressure, everything is scrutinized. To test the crude oil pumping system, the tanks are filled with seawater and checked for leaks. Next, seawater is blasted through the pipelines. When the Fairfax begins pumping crude in a few weeks' time, this incredible force will be out of sight, safely hidden away, coursing through an oil refinery's pipes in a massive, life-giving energy transfusion.
We can discharge 15,000 cubic meters of cargo per hour, and that involves taking it from deep in the tanks, raising it to deck level, and then along the piping on the deck to about midship where the cargo manifolds are, then out to the sides of the ship, depending on which side is being used or has the connection to shore.
The mechanical force behind this crude oil Niagara is a steam turbine in the engine room. The fresh water for the steam is distilled on board ship at a rate of more than 60,000 tons a day. The Fairfax has the ability to pump itself dry in 24 hours, making it possible for her to turn around faster than most of the world's oil tankers and speed back to Arabia. In a few days, the Fairfax will head for the Middle East. Crude oil will replace the salt water spewing from its holds. But one big question remains. Will Mike Kennedy and his team sign off?
The reason why we built these tankers is because they will carry roughly 50% more oil per trip, and yet our operating costs for bunkers and insurance and crew will only be about, say, 15% more. And this will equate to a savings that can be used both to increase our profits and also give something to the oil companies that come to charter us.
This is the destiny of the Hellespont Fairfax, to travel between the wells of Arabia and the shores of North America in 38 days, feeding our insatiable appetite for energy. And as for the sign-off from the Hellespont Quality Control Team,
the hydrodynamics of this vessel have been great. It was even beyond the shipyard's expectations. And they go fast, they're efficient, they can turn nicely. It's just beautiful.
The whole thing has been fascinating. I've waited 25 years to build a ship. It's big, it's powerful, and we've had a chance to put a lot of innovations on. This is not only just a ship, it's a super ship.
Irish Sea had never seen anything like it. A floating city, population 2,000. With hundreds of cars and giant tractor trailers stacked below its decks. Named for an Irish literary epic, the super ferry Ulysses is itself a masterpiece. 4 times a day, Ulysses crosses between Ireland and Wales. But when the gales of winter blow across this ancient and dangerous trade route, then comes the true test of the largest capacity car ferry in the world.
Whoa.
It could be the biggest traffic jam in Europe. Enough to line 40 city blocks, and it happens here almost every day at 2:30 in the morning. They're boarding the biggest car ferry in the world, Ulysses. All 50,000 tons of her, the pride of Ireland. And this morning, Senior Second Officer Ben Hudson is packing them on.
Stephen, just take him in behind that Arctic there. Some of the passenger pieces, please.
He has only 90 minutes to get everything aboard and secured. And tonight, there may be a record load to place.
All right up, keep it right up.
To keep schedule, something must cross the ramp every 30 seconds. This vessel is built to accommodate 240 trucks and trailers, or 1,342 cars, or a combination of both. Ulysses can also carry up to 1,900 passengers.
No! Up to the front.
They come with every shape and story. Some humming with refrigerated goods. Others quiet with hard goods. Some with very dangerous goods. Some with students eager to tour. Others going home for the last time. The shortest distance between Great Britain and Ireland is this route linking Holyhead with Dublin, across the Irish Sea. This arm of the Atlantic Ocean, about 230 kilometers wide, with Ireland on the west shore and England, Scotland and Wales to the east. An important trade route since the days of the Roman galleons. The Irish Sea is relatively shallow compared to more open waters, with swells that can build very quickly to dangerous heights. It's unlikely that the early Roman traders were loading and departing at 3 a.m. in the middle of January.
This line here. Look, pull him up and reverse him back. Pull him over there and reverse him back outside. If you can pull up there and reverse into this line, that's all you have to do. But you'll always get the awkward driver who's not as experienced as others and he doesn't pull into the lane right. And you have to reverse them back and forth. That can take a bit of time. This is stuff you can't work out in advance. They're what you call curveballs. See, I need you outside. You're not laying there, but I need you over there and get 2 trucks beside you. Where is he going now? Look. Just drive up and reverse back. You want me to do it? Generally speaking, we were were on time tonight, 4 minutes late, almost a full load. Full load in, full load out. Yeah, it was pretty good going.
All vehicles are chained down. The Irish Sea can be unpredictable at the best of times.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard Irish Ferries vessel Ulysses for your morning trip to Dublin. We've completed loading now. ETA Dublin this morning, 0700. Weather on passage is good. The fresh winds we've had over the last few days are died down for the time being, so it should be a nice comfortable trip over to Dublin. Thank you.
With that announcement, the world's largest ferry flexes her considerable muscles.
You know, when they were preparing for sea, probably the touch of 8 buttons and the ship is at sea. When I started, you went and you did things, you walked away, there was no control room in the ship. You went and you opened the valve, you started a compressor, you started a pump, you closed and opened valves manually. As you see, the whole thing is on a program. It does everything itself.
Four giant thrusters push Ulysses sideways, straight out from the dock. Twin propellers at the stern, kicking her forward when she's pointed at the sea. It's the marine equivalent of a vertical takeoff in a Harrier jet fighter. The image of James Joyce, author of the literary masterpiece Ulysses, for which this super ship is named, looks on approvingly as passengers head to the bars and lounges for their first taste of Ireland, even though it's 4 a.m. The reason behind the never-ending stream of people and goods across the Irish Sea is summed up by Irish Ferries marketing director Tony Kelly.
We're an island nation. We depend virtually exclusively on sea connections for our goods operating on and off, be it in terms of our exports or indeed what we consume every day. So very high quality sea ferry connections particularly are critical to this economy's growth and good health.
This growth and good health, stimulated by the European Economic Union, has created a huge demand for bigger, faster, and more frequent ferries. In the late 1990s, traffic to and from the island had increased to the point where it could barely be satisfied. Large new ferries were continually being built and sailed into service, only to find they were soon overrun. Just 3 years old, the biggest ship in the fleet, the 184-meter, 34,000-ton Isle of Inishmore, was unable to meet the demand. The idea of building a much bigger vessel took hold at Irish Ferries. Operations Director John Riley.
So the question then was how big? So I said, well, what's wrong with making it twice as big? So the challenge really there at that time was to make it twice as big as the Inishmore, although at that stage I didn't think it was really achievable.
Irish Ferries were having trouble finding a shipyard that could deal with the concept. People who were prepared to push the design and engineering envelopes to the limit.
All over the world initially they narrowed down to about 5 or 6 yards, and then narrowed down to 3 yards. Eventually we chose a shipyard in Finland called Eckerfin Yards to build this ship for us.
But the Finnish shipbuilders had to overcome 3 very difficult design challenges in order to be successful. First, the dock at Dublin couldn't be made any bigger, so the new ship was limited to under 210 meters in length. Second, the facilities in Ireland and Wales could provide ships with no more than 2 levels of ramps for loading and unloading, so the extra decks needed to double capacity would have to be added above and below the standard decks. The third constraint was perhaps the most problematic. The depth of Dublin Harbour, a very ancient shallow harbour, would dictate the draft of the ship, the amount under the water, no more than 6.5 meters, leaving a scant 2 meters of water under the keel. It would also mean the propellers would have to be smaller to avoid hitting the bottom and spin at very high revolutions to produce the necessary crossing speed of 22 knots, or almost 40 kilometers an hour.
When we signed up the contract for this, we had developed plans to about, I'd say, maybe 80% or thereabouts, but there were some serious challenges outstanding at the time of contract. And we both took a bit of a risk there that we would be able to solve those during the contract period.
Detailed designs for Ulysses were completed in the spring of 1999, and construction began immediately. With a 50-year history and some 1,500 vessels designed and built, Aker Finyards is one of the world's largest shipyards. But even with its vast experience in the field of specialty or purpose-built ships, this one was a very unique proposition. A car ferry with 12 decks and 4 kilometers of vehicle lane space that could function in Dublin Harbour with only 2 meters of water under her keel. Ulysses was delivered to Irish Ferries in March of 2001. The final price tag, 450 million euros.
The Port of Dublin was developed really for sailing ships, so we're very constrained, especially at the entrance. It's very narrow. Ships of this size now cannot pass other ships in the entrance, so there has to be a certain amount of traffic control. At low waters we have about a minimum 2 meters, which is 6 feet.
What's the threat?
Not an awful lot when you think of the size of the ship, but it's adequate. Going up and down the channel in Dublin, you have to be very careful of the effects of the wind. Push up to the bank on either side, and then approaching the berth too, you have to be very careful. A side wind, it acts nearly like a sail.
Turning around the world's largest ferry load of people, trucks and cars, unloading and loading simultaneously. Unless the ship could be loaded and unloaded in 90 minutes, half the